Good morning. It's amazing. There's so many things that are ironic, hypocritical, paradoxical about this video. Eric Spracklin posts this video. This is, it was captioned breaking. Hamas sympathizers have completely taken over the rotunda at the U.S. Capitol calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. It got community noted because it said this is not the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol, it's the rotunda of the Cannon House office building. Now, I have not yet Googled what the Cannon House office building is in terms of political use. But I love the adding content. Yeah, okay, fine. He made a mistake in his description. I think we all understood pretty much where Eric Spracklin was going with this. That we seem to have a takeover of government buildings for political purposes. And there were other videos going viral yesterday as well. And the question becomes the obvious one. Do these people go to jail for 10, 12, 15 years? How many of them are going to get hunted down by the administrative state, the deep state, the politicized Department of Justice, FBI? How many? None? None whatsoever? Oh, but the difference is they didn't take over the Capitol building rotunda. They took over the Cannon whatever building that was rotunda. Oh, that's why I know the word rotunda. In the movie Trainspotting, when they had the issue about the guy having returned a video of intimate moments between him and his girlfriend, and she says, "What do you mean, you rotunda?" Rotunda sounds like returned it. Okay. How many are going to get arrested? My prediction, it's a big fat goose egg, a big fat bagel. A Montreal sesame seed bagel is how many. The ultimate irony, hypocrisy, contradiction, double standard. Why aren't people calling for a ceasefire, negotiations in the conflict of Ukraine versus Russia? Or I should say Russia versus Ukraine. Why aren't people protesting for a ceasefire there? Oh, well, you can't negotiate with Putin. He's an evil man with evil intentions that can't be negotiated with. But ceasefire and negotiate with Hamas. I mean, that's the mutually conflicting positions here. Agreed. Different circumstances, different, and one can parse their way out of this and say, yeah, I think they need to negotiate and ceasefire in Israel, despite at the very least, this particular attack being not provoked, although people are going to say it was provoked by decades of occupation. They'll say the power structure is different, therefore ceasefire negotiations here, but there will be no ceasefire negotiations or discussions of how to end the slaughter in Ukraine. That and none of those people are going to jail, period. Oh, a lot of haters in the chat this morning. My goodness, I tell you, Vivek must be doing something right to have haters on my channel on YouTube. This is going to be fun. Vivek Ramaswamy is finally now coming on with Viva. It's Viva and Vivek. It's got a beautiful rhyme to it. And I should say, there's a lot of hate, but politics is filled with hate. There's a lot of love as well because, look, I'll tell you one thing. I like Vivek. I like the message that he's getting out there. Dude, I think I could be like the best campaign manager or prepper everywhere because I can say, man, this is how you have to answer this question in the future, and these are the things. Whatever. This is not going to be a Mehdi Hassan hostile, what is the word, ambush style interview. Mehdi Hassan is the master of those. Even if I didn't like Vivek, it wouldn't be that. But this is going to be an interview with Vivek Ramaswamy, presidential candidate. 30 minutes, so we're going to not delve into childhood all that much, although I said I might ask a few questions of childhood. So 30 minutes with Vivek. When he has to go, he's going to duck out. I'm going to carry on with the stream. And then we're going to go on over to Locals afterwards for our little Locals after party, where we might have our Locals conversation with another local supporter. For those of you who don't know, weekly, maybe every other week, we do an interview with a member of our community, a supporter from our community, and we might be doing that later on today. But also, very important because today's a jam-packed day. After Vivek Ramaswamy, and after I finish with this stream, I'm heading to do an in-studio interview with Dinesh D'Souza. This will be our second, about his new documentary called Police State, which I just finished watching this morning because I got a sneak preview. So it's going to be a big day and a wild day because from Vivek to Dinesh, And we're talking about what is going wrong with the American system right now. The beautiful, I think, was it Ronald Reagan who called America the shining beacon on the hill? The beautiful experiment of democracy. What was the pinnacle, the summit, the epitome. It was the goal to be strived for in terms of democracy, freedom of religion, rights, individual rights, seems to be under attack daily. And boy, howdy. So that's the schedule for today. You all know I'm going to end on YouTube after Vivek because it's not going to be long enough to cut early, and then go over to Rumble and vivabarneslaw.locals.com to talk about other stuff, because there has been other news. Douglas Mackey, 7 months in jail. The guy who did the meme dude. Ricky Vaughn on Twitter. Ricky Vaughn was the pitcher from Major League. Sentenced for what they are calling election interference scheme, because he made a meme that said, vote from home, vote Hillary, text 707, whatever the hell it was, hashtag DOJ. I'm just talking about the meme. I'm not engaging in election interference. He got convicted. Well, first he got charged, then he got convicted, and then he got sentenced 7 months in jail. There's another person, I forget what her name was. Hold on one second. I found the video yesterday with the help of our vivabarneslaw.locals.com community, where everyone is very much above average. Yeah, it's Ms. Christina Wong. She's a comedian. I'll show you the video afterwards. Who tweeted out a video that said, hey, I've gone full MAGA. Vote MAGA on November 9th. Hashtag election interference scheme. 7 months for Douglas Mackey. 7 months for everybody. Oh, lordy, lordy. Okay, so that's what's going on. Standard disclaimers, you know what it is. Barnes is right. I'm not going to probably get to the super chats during the interview. I asked, the community if they had any specific questions that I didn't already have on my list. Probably will not get to all of them because 30 minutes goes by in the blink of an eye. All right, now I see our guest in the backdrop, but they're miking up, so I'm going to give it a few more seconds. Can you ask Vivek why joining the TPP would not gut the rest of the manufacturing in the U.S.? I'll flag it if we get there. I've got my questions. I've got some questions because I got to get to them. There are questions that I've been asking myself, and holy cows, I've got to ask him what it's like to try to sit down. I was rewatching his Mehdi Hasan interview. It's an amazing thing to not be allowed to speak and to basically have to submit to being abused in an interview with Mehdi Hasan. Now I see Vivek in the backdrop. Are you ready to go? He's moving the camera a little bit. Okay. I don't know that Vivek knows. He might know that I saw him back in LA when he was getting teamed up, boy howdy, by the other people on stage. Okay. This is going to be good, people, everyone. Vivek, I'm bringing you in 3, 2, 1. Sir, how goes the battle?
How you doing, man?
Well, I'm doing well now. This finally happened, and I'm mildly excited because of all the other candidates. I like DeSantis, but I like you. I say but, and I like you. But I've got some questions because people have questions.
It's good.
Vivek, first of all, you're 39 years old?
I'm 38 now. I'll be 39 by the time of the general election. Yeah.
A baby. You're a baby. Okay. Look, the number one question that people have, and it's the number one skepticism, they compare you to Obama because you're, it's almost a flaw to be a smooth talker and to be able to think on your feet. But a lot of people question your sincerity. And I don't know how you answer that question, but what do you say to the people who say this is Obama 2.0, smooth, slick, says all the right things, but if and when he ever gets into power, he'll throw us under the bus like Obama?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously, not only to say I disagree with that is like almost the wrong thing. It's not an opinion. It's just not true. It's not who I am. But I get why people are skeptical, right? You got somebody who's young, seemingly comes out of nowhere. For the people who've been following me for the last 3-4 years, I didn't really come out of nowhere. But for most of the country, I understand that it seems that way. And we have been given good reason to be skeptical. I mean, you think about the number of times we have been lied to or duped by the government or the people in power or otherwise. Yeah, I think that there's good reasons to be skeptical. And so I invite the questions. All I would say is look at the things I'm actually saying. I don't think they sound very much like Barack Obama. In fact, I don't think they sound very much like many other Republicans who have failed this country for 20, 30 years either. ending affirmative action. Not exactly a popular talking point in either political party. It hasn't been for a long time. Even the Republicans could have done it. Abandoning the climate cult. I think the climate change agenda is a hoax, and I'm not saying that as a slogan. I've gone deep in terms of the scientific arguments for why in a lot of my writing and elsewhere. Ending the censorship culture in this country, the illegality of using tech companies to do through the back door what government couldn't do through the front door. I was, starting years ago, before people had heard of me, the person who authored many of the legal arguments that are now being used in court to win those battles. And so I just say a couple of things to people who are skeptical. Go back to the lead up to my actually stepping down from my job as a biotech CEO to take on some of the views that I have. Look at the books and the articles I've published, and then look at how that translates into what has since become the talking point binder that's popular for many anti-woke Republicans. And then one of the things I do, I hire people. I've built multiple businesses, hired thousands of people in the last 10 years, directly and indirectly. One of the things I do to look at somebody's sincerity is to say, what has that person given up, right? It's easy to say something. What sacrifice have you made? And so I get, somebody's slick, smooth talking, fast talking, and, everybody has their gifts. When I was a kid, I wanted to be, a guy who played in the NBA. That wasn't in the cards. I'm 6 feet tall and not an inch higher, so that ain't going to happen. But, I have been, everybody has their gifts, and I'm trying to use mine, and communication and effective writing. These are things that I do well. But I get that could look to somebody like, slick, smooth talking, Obama-like salesman or whatever the criticisms are. A better metric to look at is, what has somebody given up? What sacrifice have you made? Have you ever traded off anything for your convictions? In my case, I'm not saying this to pat myself on the shoulder, but as people look to get to know me, it's worth getting to know me. I built a multi-billion-dollar biotech company. I was in a comfortable position, well-paid position, as CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, and George Floyd dies and Black Lives Matter comes around. Every biotech CEO, every tech CEO, every major CEO in this country was reciting from a catechism around what you were supposed to do in terms of corporate donations and statements in favor of BLM. Now, today the environment has changed, but back then there was no tolerance for dissent. I went a different direction. I said companies should not be wading into this socio-political battle. And by the way, BLM is way off base for calling for dismantling the nuclear family structure. I was the only CEO in America, maybe one of 2 or 3 CEOs in America at the time, who was willing to say it. Multiple advisors to my company stepped down, major backlash. I have to face a choice. Do I stay CEO of my company? It would have been easy to do it, continue reciting the catechism that everybody else was reciting. I chose to step down from my job as a CEO to avoid negative consequences for my company, but so that I could still speak my mind freely as a citizen. Think about the things I'm saying on this campaign. I would say use your brain. You're thinking people. If you're watching a program like this, you're brought to it for a reason, is you're probably skeptical of what you're force-fed anyway. So fine, stay skeptical of what you're force-fed. And think about the positions I'm taking on what the right path forward is in U.S. engagement in places like not only Ukraine, but Israel now. You want to talk about my position on opposing electric vehicle subsidies, my commitment to pardon peaceful protesters on January 6th, heck, my commitment to pardon Trump. Do the math in your head. Yes, I have a lot of historical connections on Wall Street and in high finance and in Silicon Valley. Do you think that's helped me get more super PAC donors into the independent efforts that support political campaigns? Do you think that's been helpful? Or do you think it's been hurtful? And you can look at maybe the other candidates that have refused to take those positions. They've done really well on the mega donor circuit. That's not the game I'm playing, but it's not something that's lifted up this campaign either. Instead, I've chosen to put in whatever, an ungodly amount of $15, $16, $17 million of my own money. So I would just say, think independently and ask for yourself, what sacrifice is somebody making? And then make your own judgments. And I trust the people of this country to get to truth on the other side of skepticism.
To that I do say, like,
door, man.
People often say, like, it's an overnight, you've come out of nowhere, but it, like with bamboo grows, whatever the analogy goes, it grows feet overnight, but it took years for the root system to be able to sustain that growth. And and my retort to this is, by the way, you might be saying the things that are good for the for the people, but they're not the popular things to say politically, and that's one thing. So saying the right things, which are convenient for the wrong reasons, is far different than saying the unpopular things, even if it is for the wrong reasons. At least you're saying the things that the people want. But My question is: are you not flabbergasted that you're basically the only one, short of Ron DeSantis, who is a little more reluctant sometimes to say the things you're saying? Nobody else in the GOP field is saying this. Are they out of touch, or is
I'm
this
not
just
flabbergasted anymore, to be honest with you. I actually, my opinions on Ron have evolved through this campaign for the more positive. Actually, I think he's a good person and comes from a good family. I just think that these are people tainted by a broken system. And I have a front row understanding now as an outsider. Before, I didn't quite have the appreciation I do now. The super PACs. It's a game. It is a whole puppet system. It's the mother's milk of politics. So think about it. If you can't fund your campaign any way at scale to compete, other than to get massive mega donors into super PACs, then yes, you are beholden to what they want you to say. It's not your fault. It's not anybody else's fault. It's just the way the system works. And it is just that broken. And so the farce is that it's $3,300 per person, per primary, and per general election to be able to make a campaign contribution because we don't want corruption. That's the way the system works that way. And you can't corrupt a politician for $3,300 at the federal level, right? It's a lot of money for a lot of people, but it's not going to corrupt a politician who's going to dance to your tune. But $33 million probably will. And that's the way this game is played. And you're catching me kind of 9 months into this campaign at a moment where I have frankly become somewhat disillusioned and cynical and jaded by it. But then on the other side, all the more motivated to say we're going to come in and see if we can't just break this thing and raise it to the ground. Both the way the system works in electoral politics, get rid of the super PAC puppetry, but then get into the federal government, the equivalent shadow government that exists in the administrative state that turns the elected officials into really just puppets, not representatives for the people, but representatives, servants for the people who are the permanent state that's in that government. And so, in one hand, I'm at a deeply cynical and jaded place right now, seeing what I've seen. On the other hand, I'm more motivated than ever to actually give this the best shot we can of seeing this through. My heart says we can still succeed. That's not up to me. That's up to the people of this country. But to answer your question, I'm not flabbergasted. I get it. I have a deep understanding of exactly why it works the way it does. It's not shock and dismay and thinking that this individual politician was a bad person or a sellout. Almost anybody in their position would be doing the same thing because that's the way the broken system is made to work.
Well, and that's one of my theories is that there's two ways to get to a person. One is to buy them, and the other one is to either extort or intimidate them. And you're running with a young family. You have 3 young kids, I think? Or
2 young kids.
2 young kids. Some people are going to say if you can't be bought, you can be intimidated. And look, politics is dirty beyond words. What do you do to quell that concern that you are vulnerable to the extent that you've seen what they've done to Trump, you've seen what they've done to his kids, and you're exposing yourself and your family to that backlash as well?
Yeah, so I think that fortunately one of the things that, I'm not saying it's easy, but one of the things that makes it easier, my kids are like quite young. One is a year old and 15 months old, and one is about 3.5 years old. So in terms of just like reputational slandering and the kinds of things they've tried to do to Trump's kids, at least that dimension of this is they're too young for it. And that's, I think, a big positive. We whisk them. I'm going to be, later today whisking them on the trip to our next campaign stop, right? And so they're happy to show up and, okay, it's the next adventure. The campaign bus is in some new place. So in some ways, it's a little bit easier actually to do it when your kids are, when your kids are actually that young. I think it's helpful to have kids. At least for me, it's grounding. Sometimes you're going through the motions and you ask yourself, like, why the hell am I bothering with all of this? I think that when I do have kids, it changes, for me at least, it totally changed my perspective on life. It changed my perspective. It was the year that I also left my business career. Part of the reason was all the George Floyd nonsense and the politicization of corporate America that I was sick and tired of and wanted to speak out about. But I wouldn't have done it if I didn't have kids. My first son was born that year in 2020 as well. And it also is one of these things that makes you take a step back and ask, what the heck is the point? I'm going to accumulate a bunch of green pieces of paper. Fine. Is that the inheritance I want to give my kids? I don't think it is. Most kids who inherited that kind of stuff would end up being depressed. I went to school and college and places with many of them too. The inheritance I want to give them is a country that is hopefully at least as good, if not greater, than the country that Apoorv and I grew up in. And so for me, it's a positive. It gives me my sense of motivation. They're not yet of an age where at least they have to bear all of those negatives. I think that there are more sinister versions of the question you asked too. Look, I mean, what are you going to do? You can't live your life in fear. I don't, right? I think that a lot of people might fear that the worst thing that could happen to them is, okay, well, we're all mortal, right? I mean, it starts and it ends somewhere. So take that off the table. If you start realizing that you're human and you're not God, then you have something in common with the rest of human beings. Life is going to come to an end at some point. Might as well live it with purpose while you're given the short time that God's given you here on earth, right? So if you think it's being done by you and somehow you're afraid of the end and think your objective is to somehow make yourself personally immortal, okay, great. That's actually the people who have great fear of the kinds of things that allow them to be captured. If you just acknowledge that we're all here for a fleeting time anyway, we're all put here for a purpose, we might as well make most of the short time that we're given, that there is more to this life than just the aimless passage of time and the fear of that aimless passage of time ending. That's certainly the way I look at it. Then, you know what? That ends up being a lot more liberating and a lot harder, at least, to be captured or intimidated to do something that you otherwise wouldn't want to do. And so that's how I'm looking at this. That's how we raise our kids to, when they're old enough, certainly we hope to raise our kids to view the world similarly. Makes for a more meaningful life, at least. And whether that increases the odds of electoral success or not, I have no idea. But that's the way we look at it.
It's good. It's a good perspective. I try not to live in fear, but my goodness, seeing the way everything has been weaponized for the destruction of the ideological adversaries. Now, speaking of the destruction of the ideological adversaries, Vivek, the biggest complaints or the biggest critiques of you. You didn't vote. I mean, these are non-substantive ones in my view.
That's all right.
You didn't vote for a few years.
In some ways, yeah.
But the big one is the suspicion about the pharma, how you made your money, your ties to China, which the three of them during the last debate were really, really eager to pounce on you for.
I mean, that one was the most ridiculous of them, but I'll address them all.
Well, let's start with you made your money, and the critique is that you made your money by buying the rights to a failed Alzheimer's drug, hyping it up with family ties, so that you could repurpose it, rebrand it, go public, have it fail later on after you cashed out your money.
I mean, it started from the left, and the right has picked up on this.
I saw. Yeah. Just I'm steel manning it as much as I can. I saw the analysis on Twitter, and I've lost money in the pharma. I know the risk. I didn't need you to quote that 99 point whatever percent of medications fail. People know that who invest, and if they don't, they shouldn't be investing. But that's the critique. And how? Let
me just address it. I mean, this is. There's some things that are different opinions. There's some things that are just wrong facts. This is in the category of wrong facts. I developed an Alzheimer's drug. It failed. Over 99% of them fail. Most drugs ever developed fail. I didn't make a dime on that. Okay? I lost more. I was hurt more by that than anybody else was. But here's how I did make my wealth. And you're right, I have succeeded. 5 of the medicines that I worked on are FDA approved today. One of them is a life-saving therapy in kids. 100% of those kids die by the age of 3 if they're not treated. A majority of those kids live lives of normal duration if they are treated. Another one's a drug for prostate cancer. Another one is for endometriosis, for uterine fibroids. Another one for elderly people with overactive bladder. Another one for psoriasis. Yes, that's how I made my money. We did, among other things, a $3 billion deal where some of those drugs were then sold to another company that markets them today. Another one is marketed by the company that I founded, and it's a $9-10 billion public company today. And yes, I was the sole founder of that company. That's how I made my money. And so this ridiculous idea that the most sophisticated investors, biotech investors in the world, who were those who backed the risk that they, like I took, that there's a chance that an Alzheimer's drug could work, and it didn't work, they all understood the risks of failure, as did I. I didn't make a dime off of that. Now, the thing that I've learned about politics is people can literally make anything up. And so that particular subsidiary was a public company. If you're a public company, you know exactly who's sold and who's not. You can look it up. Not a single share. I could have sold a lot of shares of that company. I didn't. Not a single share. It was a company called Axovan. Could have sold it. Didn't. And some of the people who worked on that were some of the most prominent people in the industry. I mean, the guy who was like one of the godfathers of an early drug for Alzheimer's disease was the chief development officer of that company. They all, like me, believed that this had a chance of success. It didn't pan out. Like 99% of other drugs in the space, it didn't pan out. The thing that was unique about me is that most biotech companies never get one drug approved. My company worked on 5 that are FDA approved today, and yes, that's how I earned a big chunk of my wealth. I'm proud of it. I don't apologize for it. And, I think that politics is dirty, but what can you say? That one's just an outright falsehood.
What I love is, well, first of all, one of the catchphrases or the talking points was a teachers union. I forget which one of the investors had lost money. And so, but when you were on with Mehdi Hassan, and he says, well, you sold out before. It didn't get FDA approval when you sold out, as if that's a flaw. As if that's a fault and not a mistake on your behalf, where hypothetically, had you held on until it got FDA approval, although it had passed phase 3, you would have made a little more money.
Well,
and
he was referring to the fact that, and if you know the first thing about pharma, and I don't, blame a bonehead like him for having not the first clue about pharma, what he's referring to is, so the drugs that succeeded, we took them through phase 3 to the doorstep of FDA approval. Some of the drugs my company kept and got through FDA approval and marketed. The other ones sold off in a big deal. Yeah, that's a big success. And so in some ways you have to pick your criticism. Either you're saying the drugs failed and I'm a failure. Well, that doesn't work because I got these drugs successfully developed. Some subset of them were then sold to somebody else to market them, and that was a success to the tune of $3 billion that my investors made. You got to pick your criticism. And in some ways, if your agenda was senseless in the first place, then you're not going to make sense if you're Mehdi Hassan anyway. But I don't let this stuff. Stuff doesn't bother me personally. I just think it's important that people actually have the facts.
Now,
bottom line, how I made my money: 5 drugs, FDA approved today, multi-billion-dollar company. I'm proud of it. It's probably one of the best track records in the modern history of the biotech industry. And I think the other criticism embedded in that is somehow, does that mean I'm of big pharma?
That is the critique, and some people say, I don't even trust FDA approval, given what we've seen now with the jab.
Fair enough.
But some people are going to say you're tied to big pharma. You're a snake in that.
Is this show airing on Rumble right now?
It is.
Okay. So the easiest way I can explain this is, I am about as close to big pharma as Rumble is to big tech. Okay. So yes, have I developed pharma? Is Rumble posting videos on the internet like YouTube does? Yes, it does. Did I develop medicines like other pharma companies develop medicines? Yes, I did. Talk to other pharma CEOs. They despise me, and the reason why is I called big pharma's bluff. The medicines that I developed were in areas that pharma had systematically abandoned. And that's because of a lot of deep-seated cultural, bureaucratic culture in big pharma, where they all go in packs to the same areas to avoid accountability for failure. So if they're all failing in the same area, nobody has any criticism that they take, and they can also set prices equally, et cetera, versus leaving other areas behind that they ignore. So I developed the drugs in the areas that pharma had ignored at the time that pharma was ignoring them. And so in some ways, that called pharma's bluff. It's why they don't like me. And I've stood up to the bureaucracy of big pharma. I've stood up to other bureaucracies in the ESG movement and otherwise, which I can get to. But why did I bring up Rumble as an analogy? I'm a big fan of using the market, using commerce, using the economy as a way to drive change. And just as a side note, that was also why I became an investor in Rumble back when it was a private company, one of the early backers of Rumble as a private company, long before it became a public company today, because I loved the mission in challenging YouTube and saw an opportunity to do it too. That's effectively what I did in pharma as well. It's what I did when I founded Strive in standing up to BlackRock. And so one of the things I think conservatives also, just to maybe be a little less lazy about this, is to say that we want to win, fine, let's win. Do it by actually showing up and playing on the same playing field that the other side is showing up and winning on. BlackRock wins, fine, start Strive. Pharma's corrupt, fine, start a different way of doing it. YouTube's corrupt, great. Rumble's a great new way to do it, and I've been involved in different ways in all three, and so that's part of how we win.
You reminded me of the attack that you're on TikTok. How could you go on TikTok after trashing it? That was during the second debate.
That's right.
The other critique was that you manufactured your drugs in China up until 2018 when Nikki Haley suggested you sold them when you were deciding to run for president, which temporally didn't make sense. And my response to that is, and it's going to be the question, I don't fault people for following the rules. I would fault the government for enabling rules that allow for this. I don't fault Trump for not paying more taxes than he should. Yeah. And if people don't like the system, fix the system. What do you do, Vivek?
Yeah, I agree with that. So I would change the rules. And part of my views on China, they're very well-informed views on China. Yes, I have done business in China. It's not that the drugs were manufactured in China, but it was that we started a subsidiary to potentially develop medicines for the Chinese market. By the way, at a time where that was the new in vogue popular thing to do for every tech company, every company in America, the new frontier of the Chinese market. And so, you know what? I founded my company at 28. I'm a young guy looking at where opportunity is. Seems like that's an interesting opportunity to pursue. I did. Well, my eyes were opened, and I wrote about this in my first book, Woke Inc. I think China's playing a downright dangerous game, using capitalism as a vehicle to advance their own objectives. So a couple years later, once I saw the risks personally of doing business in China, and my first company got the hell out of there, and then in my second company, Strive, that I started, I made a day one commitment that no American CEO has made, certainly not in the financial services industry, saying that Strive, the asset manager I co-founded, would never do business in China, not because we were trying to be virtuous or virtue signaling about it, but because in the long run, if you have the boot of the CCP on your neck, you can't serve American clients if they're making you vote your shares in certain ways that don't align with U.S. client interests. And so that's a long way of saying that a lot of the other professional puppet politicians on that stage, they don't know the first thing about any of this. They're just spouting off, ironically, what many of them read. Nikki Haley, funny thing is, she blurbed and complimented my book, Woke Inc., when it came out. Ron DeSantis, and I love that Ron read it. Ron's unlike Nikki, not a total snake. But the fact that these people read it, I'm proud of them. But now they're using the talking points that I've served them up from an actual knowledgeable way to somehow say that, oh, this guy had done business in China. That's idiotic. Most American CEOs have led companies that tried to expand into the Chinese market. Turns out I was the only one that actually had the guts to speak out about it after I got the hell out of there. So what will we do about it? I think that U.S. businesses should not be allowed to expand into the Chinese market until China plays by the same set of rules. I don't think China should buy land in this country. I don't think China should be able to donate to universities in this country. And so those are extreme quantum leap positions to some that haven't been very popular with the mega donors in the Republican Party, but I understand that if we actually want to fix this, that's how we're going to have to do it. And yeah, I think that somebody who has experience might be a little bit better off doing this than somebody like a Nikki Haley who, pathetically makes $8 million in her in her cup of coffee stint at the UN, goes and makes millions of dollars afterwards opening a military contracting business and joining the board of Boeing. I mean, that's the real corruption, is the people who make money off of public service. Somebody like that should never come anywhere within spitting distance of the White House. But in my case, yeah, I come from the outside. You're right, I didn't vote for much of my 20s, like most people in their 20s, it turns out, because I was jaded and disaffected by professional puppet politicians like the Nikki Haleys of the world. If that's the choice, then in my 20s I sat it out. But I'm at a different stage of my life now and said, you know what, if we're going to fix this system, let's actually do it through the front door, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Well, I love that they fault you for having done business in China, whereas all of the green energy policy is directly and immediately benefiting China, and they don't put two and two together.
And all of those governors, Haley included, but the other ones too, have brought Chinese businesses to their own states, bragged about it. In fact, that particular vessel, Nikki Haley, corrupt vessel, was one when she was UN ambassador, called China Our Great Friend. If you're doing that from a policymaking position as U.S. ambassador to the UN, I think you're disqualified from being the next president. But if you're somebody coming in from the outside with actual informed views to say, this is how I'm going to change it, yeah, that's what I think it's going to take.
Now, speaking of George Soros, Vivek, we're going to get into this also because it's another one of the classic attack points. You took a, what was it? Not a sponsor, a grant.
It's a scholarship. It's a generic scholarship. Yeah.
From not even, people think it's George Soros, not that it might make any difference or a distinction without a difference. The brother and the sister of George Soros had a scholarship fund, which you took in 2008? 2010. It was $50,000, and Mehdi Hassan, in Understanding All Finances, says you took this $50,000 scholarship at a year when you were making $340,000, as if those two are somehow related. And people say now you are indebted to Soros. You are a Soros puppet. You were on the WEF website, although I think you actually forced them to take you down and issue an apology.
Yeah.
What's up with that scholarship, and how do you quell those concerns?
I'm now convinced that I will never quell those concerns, and I will take them with me to the grave. Okay, even if we want to save the United States of America, January 2033, I'll leave this office and say that we shut down the deep state, we declared independence from China, but people will still, to my grave, it'll be somebody coming spray painting my tombstone with the fact that there was a Soros scholarship I won at the age of 24, even though it wasn't George Soros. But that's okay. I've made peace with that. I've explained this a million times, but I'm happy to say I should say it more because people are fixated on it, and I don't blame them. In a certain sense, we live in a crazy world, so be skeptical of everything. Fine, just get to the truth. I was 24. There's a scholarship, some guy by the last name of Soros, who's related to George Soros, but not George Soros, who has different views from George Soros, who made his money independently, who's now long dead, by the way, and has been long dead. It was long dead, for years. Funded a scholarship that like generically hundreds of kids, hundreds, thousands, I don't know how many apply for it, hundreds get it. I got it. I went to law school, got $50,000. I wasn't rich back then. Yes, I did make $350,000 that year. It was the highest amount of money I'd ever made. I was a young person. I was successful as an investor at a hedge fund, so I'm not going to apologize for that. But somebody gives you $50,000, that's still a lot of money to me at the time. I would take it. Would I bother going through the application process now? No, I wouldn't, because that amount of money just doesn't, thankfully for the success I've earned, doesn't mean a lot to me. Back then it did. So yeah, I applied to the scholarship. I took it. I'd advise my kids to do the same thing. I'd advise anybody kid to do the same thing. Not if there's strings attached to it, but if there's a merit-based scholarship you can apply for when it helps you pay for school, have at it, go for it. That's what I would say. The irony is that much of this criticism has actually come not just from the Mehdi Hassans, but from people on the right. And I just say, open your eyes, people. Apply the same standards. Some of it come from people in our America First base. I'm part of that. I'd say if you're going to ask that question, it's interesting to at least note that there are other candidates in this race. I'm not holding this against them, but just hard facts. I mean, Ron DeSantis held a fundraiser with George Soros' investment firm's partner this June. And I'm not trying to play the silly game of gotcha. But if you're going to ask the question, then just open your eyes, people. I mean, Donald Trump took a $160 million loan from George Soros in his business career. Does that mean that I think he's some sort of Soros puppet? Of course not. That's ridiculous. I understand he's a businessman. And I was a 24-year-old smart college student or smart soon-to-be law student. Yeah, I was smart. I took it. So I understand that people make decisions either in their capacity as students in law school applying for scholarships or even businessmen who don't necessarily look at who's giving them the best loan rate. That's probably the right answer. So I don't hold that against them. But I do think that for a base of people who have been force-fed by mainstream media, be skeptical of that. But be skeptical of what you're fed by, some algorithm on social media as well, or some super PAC feeding your mailbox. Just stay skeptical of everybody and get to truth yourself.
Well, and what I say is also, like, people presume that their understanding of the Soros name and brand today was the same in 2008.
Yeah,
I was alive in 2008.
So you're that young? I didn't realize. I'm 44. I'm older than you. Yeah.
No, and like I remember, I saw George Soros on 60 Minutes. The name did not have the same.
Totally. You wouldn't have, even if you were going to say, well, you should have had the name recognition, it wouldn't have occurred to most people in their 20s back then, it's just a random name. Like, that's what that was. There's also like about 50 other scholarships that I've applied to and won over the course of my high school and college and, through the early years of graduate school. And so, yes, any scholarship that's merit-based, apply for it, fill something in through the website, helps you pay for school, go for it. And I would advise any other kid to do the same thing. Not if they're going to say, oh, you have to abide by some sort of code of what you do or don't say. Then forget about it. Give the money back. That's my view. But short of that, absolutely, do the smart thing. That's what I would say. And
now these are going to be the relevant questions to the day. Ukraine, America, shipping hundreds of billions there, neglecting its own borders. Israel, Gaza conflict. I'm not entirely certain what your position is on that. I mean, the question is going to be very broad, and I don't know how you answer it. How do you get out of these situations? What do you do to resolve Ukraine-Russia war? What do you do in the Middle East, broadly speaking? And what do you do to secure the border here, where America could face the exact same problems that we just saw in Israel that we might see elsewhere in the world?
So we're running a little short on time. So I actually just had a detailed discussion on the Middle East situation and Israel situation with Tucker last night, saying things that others in the Republican Party are too scared of their own shadow to say. But my view is on all of these things, we have to look at this through an American prism. I'm running for U.S. president, not president of the world. My moral obligation as the U.S. president is to the people of this country. And I will not apologize for that. That is just the moral definition of what it means to be the leader of this nation, not some nebulous global citizen. So Ukraine, I don't think this advances our national interest. I think we should immediately get to a peaceful resolution, a reasonable path to peace. Is Putin a craven dictator? Sure he is. But does that mean Ukraine is good? No, it does not. I mean, Ukraine is far from some paragon of democracy. 11 opposition parties banned, all media consolidated into one state TV media arm. The guy Zelensky and the comedian in cargo pants running a country applauding a Nazi in his own ranks. You got somebody who's trying to threaten the U.S. not to do their elections this year in Ukraine if the U.S. doesn't fork over more money. The Donbass region that's occupied, I mean, these are Russian-speaking regions in Luhansk and Donetsk that haven't even been represented in the Ukrainian parliament for up to 10 years. So cut me the crap on the good versus evil sob story that the Nikki Haley's of the world try to paint on that debate stage, duping the American people. Every time someone like her pulls the trigger to go to war, it's the cash register for her family. Forget about that and say how it's a reasonable path to peace here. I've outlined this in numerous forums. Freeze the current lines of control. Make a hard commitment that NATO doesn't admit Ukraine to NATO. But in return, you got to have Putin put up as well. Get out of that alliance with China, because the Russia-China military alliance is what threatens the United States. In the Israel situation, I'm worried right now that the ground invasion into Gaza without a clear objective is going to be a disaster. And if the U.S. is on track to funding this or backstopping this later, it's legitimate for the U.S. to ask those questions. Some, I would say, silly voices that don't think and process will say, oh, that means I'm anti-Israel. Forget about that. That's the single most pro-Israel thing I could say, is that we should have that open debate. Because you know when we didn't have it? In the aftermath of 9/11, which led us to, you're a similar generation from me. $6 trillion, thousands of American lives in Iraq and Afghanistan that we will never be able to correct or get back. I don't want to see us make those same mistakes again, and we need to be having that open debate now. Yet everybody in the GOP is so scared to be able to speak up that I literally am the only person in this race on either side that's elevating what are the vital questions to ask. I think that in a deeper sense, that's actually pro-Israel, it's pro-America. I think it's going to be a disaster for Israel if they don't go into this with clear objectives. But if the U.S. is expected to fund or backstop this, yes, these are legitimate questions for the U.S. to ask too. And just to some of those questions you were asking me in the beginning about, some sort of plant or Trojan horse, just do the math in your head, people. Do you think this is helping me? I can tell you from firsthand experience, okay? This is not helping me fund this campaign or with the fundraisers that we had planned, some of which have been canceled over people saying that these comments are inappropriate or whatever. We've had venues that canceled events that we were planning to based on the things that I'm just telling you relating to foreign policy, which is really the third rail. So just all I'd ask for people to do is think independently, use your brain, don't swallow what you're force-fed. I'm a true America First candidate. I'm going to lead this country accordingly. I got to get elected to get there. That right now, for every candidate not named Trump, that's an uphill climb. I acknowledge that. But the way I'm running this campaign for the rest of this is, and you go through a process, you sort of learn there's certain norms. I could care less for the norms. For the rest of this thing, my job's to do my best. That's why I'm doing stuff like this, tell you who I am and what I stand for. If you want to vote for me, great. If you, after knowing all that, you want to vote for a different person, that's cool too. But that's the way our system is supposed to work. And the one cancer in between is the super PAC and mega donor complex that stops us from having the debates that we're supposed to have.
And I guess this might be the last question here.
Yeah.
I'll go and tell you stop. Stats are what they are. Your likelihood is what it looks like. You would obviously accept a position in a Trump administration.
That's not obvious, no. I think that I've actually mostly driven my career through the private sector. I actually am more convinced than ever that there are too few capable people driving real change in the private sector. Look at the things I've done. I'm even starting Strive single-handedly through, I wouldn't say single-handedly, there's others who helped in this, but I was at the bleeding edge of shifting the tides of the ESG cancer in capital markets. There's lots of ways of reaching the next generation. Now, my heart says that the people of this country still want an outsider, and I think we'll come around to wanting a leader from the next generation to lead this country forward. I started at 0.0% in March, coming in from the outside. And the people who have been really following me for a long time know I didn't come from anywhere, but for everybody, I've come from nowhere. But to everybody else, it seems like a guy who came from nowhere, 0.0%. I'm a major contender in this race, but still have a long way to go. I think that places like Iowa and New Hampshire, where we meet people, even this is there's through a whatever TV or computer screen or phone screen between us. There's only so much you're going to get to know a person. We spend hours with people, small groups of people in Iowa and New Hampshire. We'll see how that goes for us. My heart says we're actually going to be successful. I think the poll numbers are missing something in those early states. Most of the people who are coming to our events, and it's unique for me, not the other candidates, they haven't participated either ever or for a really long time in a caucus. So those aren't captured in what you're seeing in those early state polls. And so I think that there's a really good chance we're going to deliver a surprise in both of those early states. And so Iowa will go first in January 15th. It's 3 months from now. And so I'm in this to win this. I think we're going to be successful. I'm not that attached to I don't care about sitting in the White House or riding around on Air Force One. Air Force One's probably pretty nice, but it's not that much nicer than what I've been riding around for the last few years anyway. And so I don't fetishize the office, but I am of the belief that it's going to take somebody from the next generation to reach the next generation, a true outsider, and I think you only get to be an outsider once, a true outsider coming into this race. And in this race, that's me. And so my heart says that that's what the people are gonna want. And if the people decide that's what they want, we're ready to serve. And I expect we're gonna be successful.
Now, last one, I promise, because I'm going to respect your time. You said something that pissed a lot of people off, that you would contemplate pardoning Trump in addition to pardoning people that everybody obviously believes you should pardon. Assange, January 6ers, possibly Trump himself. What's the rationale behind the idea of floating a pardon of Trump? A pardon of Hunter.
Oh, I said I would pardon Trump, actually.
I think I might have said Trump instead of Hunter Biden.
Oh, yeah. So this is another one of these things. You don't know how this game is played. There's some reporter. He's basically like a campaign operative adjacent person. And so he calls me after the Trump stuff and says, okay, you've said that my principle for pardoning Trump and Assange and all these people, as I said, is not about politics. Anybody who has been the victim of an unjust politicized persecution through prosecution, where somebody under similar circumstances would not have been charged for their political belief, they're eligible for a pardon. He says, well, that means anybody, not just the people you've named. I said, anybody, not just the people you've named. So he said, it could be a Democrat, it could be Hunter Biden, it could be anybody. And my general point is, that's the case for anybody, in principle. I'm not going to preordain this set of principles by saying whether or not you politically agree with me. Julian Assange, for all I know, could be on the left. I don't care. So he distorts that, say, Vivek Ramaswamy open to pardoning Hunter Biden. It's just the name, it's just the way this stupid media game is played. The reality is, what's the real crime with Hunter Biden? People gun charge this or that, forget that. It's the fact that the Biden family has sold off our foreign policy to make their family rich. I mean, that's the real elephant in the room that nobody's persecuting or prosecuting or talking about. And that's not a partisan point. I think Hunter Biden and possibly Joe, if he was directly involved in it, if that's what a court of law comes to, these people should be spending time in prison if that's really what happened. And the facts certainly seem to suggest it. I believe in the rule of law and the court justice system playing itself out. But if that's what the facts bear out, then yes, they deserve to be fully held accountable to the fullest extent required. And so that's just the way I look at this. I believe in the rule of law. The other side doesn't. We will never be like them. And I apply principles. But one of the things I've realized is, like, I do these podcasts with people like you. You have the old media that's based on sound bites and individual quotes and sentences. And it's in a clash where I do these long form podcasts, and every one of these, I'm sure this one will do the same thing, get me in trouble in some way. So I don't know what I said this time that's going to get me in trouble.
You said you wouldn't work with Trump. I can predict the one.
I mean, I'm looking to be the next president of the United States. That's why we're going through the sacrifice. We'll help the country in any way we can, but they're going to airlift something. And the old world media is going to, purposefully take it out of context, partly because they don't like an outsider like me, but partly because they also don't like new media. And so this is their revenge for, taking advantage of it in the way they do. So
Vivek, anyway. I think your camera actually
I think we ran out of battery. That's why we're running out of time.
Well,
you can still hear me, right?
That's your cue. That's the cue to end this. Vivek, thank you very much. I would like to see your face while we're saying this, but thank you very much.
Thanks.
Let's do it again whenever you have time, but thank you for coming on.
Appreciate it, brother.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye.
Well, that's the this interview is over. All right, that was great. What we're going to do now, before I even give any commentary on this, we're going over to Rumble. We're going to go fraternize with the big tech on Rumble. All right, link to Rumble. I'm satisfied. I'm not commenting yet. Thanks, Vivek. I'm going to comment on some of the critique that I saw, which I flagged, and some of the praise that I saw that I flagged. But that was fantastic. Okay, so there are 728 people on YouTube. I'm going to wait for that. There you go, 726. The link to Rumble. And what we're going to do here, I got lots of stuff to talk about before I have to end this and then make my way over to Locals to interview Dinesh D'Souza. I'm not even saying what I think of. You all know what I think of Vivek. For those who saying he's Obama 2.0, okay, that's a nice trope. It's rubbish. Okay, I'm going to wait for that number to go from 726 to something lower as everyone migrates over to Rumble. Or go over to, there you go, 639. Or go over to vivabarneslaw.locals.com. How silly am I? Go to vivabarneslaw.locals.com, become a member. That doesn't require any money, but if you want to be a supporter, you can support for $7 a month, $70 a year. Everyone is above average at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. Ending on YouTube, 3, 2, 1. And I'll tell you what I really think of Vivek on Rumble.